Welcome to Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie Valentine and the host of this program. I'm a physician, evidential psychic medium, international keynote speaker, and the author of Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul. This podcast was inspired by events from my own life, and as I have journeyed through life, it has taught me that we're part of a greater divine web of interconnectedness. I have walked the path of illness, healing, and transformation, and after experiencing 2 near-death experiences, I became clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, and I was guided to attend medical school at the age of 54. In this podcast, we will meet many different types of doctors, healers, spiritual leaders, educators, and other interesting souls. And it is my hope that you will gain information from this podcast to help create a path of healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and bridge the gap between science and soul. Welcome to Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, I am so excited to introduce Dr. Nicole Kane to talk about managing anxiety and panic attacks. Dr. Nicole Kane, NDMA, is the only naturopathic doctor that also has a master's degree in clinical psychology with an expertise in natural and integrative solutions for bipolar disorder, depression, PTSD, anxiety, and other conditions. She's been consulting with clients around the world for over a decade. As an anxiety warrior herself, she has a special interest in sharing her experiences with anxiety. She even has an online course on the topic, the Anxiety Breakthrough Program. Dr. Nicole Kane's mission is to help people wake up into a life they love. So a warm welcome to you, Dr. Kane. I'm so excited that you will be sharing your tools with the listeners today.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's just a delight to connect with you after 4 years of getting to know each other.
Right? Yes, Dr. Nicole Kane was actually my teacher going through medical school. And as I only graduated 4 years ago, it is so fun to see her on my screen in front of me right now. So many times I have found that my own patients wonder if they were experiencing a panic attack. They might have woken up from a dream in the middle of the night, or if they're just having anxiety. And how do you explain the difference to the listeners if they're having anxiety or if they're actually having a panic attack?
That's a question I get asked really frequently. And it's one of the number one reasons people go to the emergency department is they're concerned they're having a heart attack or something really awful is happening to them. And it may turn out that it's in fact a panic attack that's happening. And so in order to kind of explain what your symptoms could be if you're having anxiety or panic, we want to think about Susie who's gathering berries. And so imagine that Susie, she's gathering berries in the woods for her family. And Susie has some biological characteristics that have kept her and her family alive. One is that she's able to hear if there's sounds or changes in her environment that may risk danger, right? So her hearing is tuned up. And then her brain and her body are equipped to hear a bad sound and to respond immediately. So let's say that Susie's gathering these berries and she hears the growl of a hungry tiger in the distance. And so then even before she can rationally think about it, her heart starts beating really fast. Her blood vessels dilate, sending blood to vital muscles and organs. The blood vessels constrict in her fingertips because those aren't as important for escaping as your heart and your lungs and your muscles. So now she has numbness in her fingers. Her heart is palpitating and racing. And then her brain has to calculate, turn right here, jump over this tree. She's really aware of the rocks and holes and she's running for safety. And so her thoughts are racing and they're really quick and they're really sharp and she's having to breathe more quickly and her blood pressure goes up and she feels hot because of all this increased metabolic activity. And all of these changes are driven by the body in an attempt to keep us alive, right? But what happens is that the body can't tell the difference between good stress, bad stress, actual danger, and perceived danger. In your body's opinion, a tiger is a tiger is a tiger. So if we imagine Susie now, she's laying at bed and she's trying to fall asleep. And then suddenly, as she's falling asleep, she starts to notice the numbness in her numbness and tingling in her fingers, and her heart is racing and her blood pressure is rising and her breathing is picking up, but there's no tiger, right? The mechanism is the same, but the context is different. And so when we think about anxiety and panic, the first thing we want to understand is, what is my body doing, so that we can understand that anxiety and panic are a very natural response. It's just that the body's context is thrown off when it's panic and when it's anxiety. And I could go down many rabbit holes teaching you about how this will happen or why this will happen. But the first thing that I want you to know as you're listening to this is to notice what you feel in your body and what you feel in your thoughts, and start to identify patterns for you when you're noticing that you're feeling amplified or anxious or revved, or if you've gone to the hospital and they told you it was a panic attack. Start to identify for you what that red light zone feels like, and then you'll have the tools to be able to reverse engineer that and help that stop happening.
Wow. So now if a person has anxiety or panic, what's the first thing that they can do to help manage that?
The very first thing is actually acknowledgement, which is the letter A in the ACT method. And I created the ACT method to have something that is reproducible and reliable that will walk people through actually turning the page on their anxiety. And so the first thing that I've noticed a lot when working with my clients over this last decade plus is that a lot of people will say, I'm stressed and I need it to stop. Or I'm working too much and therefore I'm not sleeping. And so I need you to give me some sedatives, whether it's botanical or pharmaceutical. And so what we want to do first is we want to actually be clear in what we're acknowledging. And this is where it gets into philosophy of what that actually is. And so as naturopathic physicians, we look at a health-based model. We look at a vitality-based model, as opposed to other medical models, which are focused on more disease. And so if Susie's laying there trying to go to sleep and she's getting this like fear of the tiger revving up in her, the dominant medical model may say, well, you need to acknowledge that anxiety is the enemy and here's how to stop it. But when I talk about acknowledgement, we're actually acknowledging something far greater, which is that our body is in its wisdom, in its vitality, in its resiliency, in its stress, in all of those things that come together that makes you beautifully and wonderfully made, that your anxiety is actually your saving grace. That your anxiety is that which gives you data so that you can use that data to heal. I think about how every practitioner has their own understanding of what's causing anxiety and what needs to happen to make it go away. And so some doctors will say, oh, you have these nutrients that are deficient, or your spine is out of alignment and needs to be corrected, or your neurotransmitters are insufficient, they need to be rebalanced, or you have dysbiosis in your gut and toxicities in your tissue. And then we have a 18-year-old girl who's seeing a specialist following a traumatic brain injury, told that anxiety is a symptom of that and the medication needs to make it go away. Or a 37-year-old mom on the verge of a panic attack after her firstborn's deployed abroad in the military. And then she's taught coping skills to shove anxiety out of the way. Or a 23-year-old crippling student who has crippling student debt, who has had lifelong panic attacks. And she's told by her clinician that stopping panic is to replace fear with logic. And so I think about these people that come to me, and the first step is about acknowledgement of the paradigm that your symptoms are your canaries. that your symptoms are your body's wise attempts to share with you something that needs healing and correcting and balancing and restoring. And that acknowledgement, that relationship with your mind and with your body and with your spirit is that springboard to help you live the life you were meant to live. So it's a really different first step than you might hear from another type of clinician.
Right. Yeah. So that acknowledgement, is it just, you just acknowledge? How would someone do that? Is it just?
Yes. And when we're acknowledging, we want to make sure we're acknowledging it from a place of power, right? And so if Susie is, trying to go to sleep and she just ran away from a tiger and she's like having some experience, it may be valuable for her to acknowledge and be like, okay, this is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on. Thank you, anxiety, for helping me identify that I need some support. Or it may simply be that I hear that you're expressing yourself, but right now I need to sleep. And so when we think about the process of acknowledgement, is we want to acknowledge at the time and in the way that is empowering for us. And so I teach people about creating intentional time to do the work, so that you're not driving down the highway and having a panic attack and having your body and mind being like, let's work on anxiety right now. And you're like, well, I'm driving. I need to focus on safe driving. And so what I like to do is I like to use protective trunks or a protective box. And so that we put the feelings, put the thoughts, we acknowledge them. Okay, I hear that you're coming up. And I honor that. And right now we need to do some work. And so I'm going to put you here. And I promise that we're going to come work on that at this time. So that's kind of the first step on acknowledgement.
Yeah. So can you talk a little about like resisting versus receiving, and, what does that look like when we're acknowledging?
Ooh, I love this. So it's great because I know that you're familiar with my content. So it's really fun to get to chat about it. And so resisting versus receiving. So resisting is when we're not acknowledging. It's when so you might wonder as a listener, like, okay, well, Dr. Kane is telling me that I need to acknowledge, I need to notice it, but she's also telling me to do it within my own autonomy. And so what exactly does that look like? And so if you're choosing, you're like, okay, anxiety, I'm going to just acknowledge that anxiety. And so I'm going to receive the feedback from my anxiety. So we may notice that it's like a wave coming in from the ocean. And as that wave comes up, you may feel the anxiety flooding. And in that moment, we can choose to resist or receive it. So let's say that we receive it. Receiving is being in the moment. It's holding the space for the emotions, even when they become extremely powerful. Receiving is letting go of the need to control. It's giving yourself the space and the time to listen. It's letting go of the impulse to change. Because a lot of people, when they notice their anxiety, they feel like they immediately need to do something about it. And receiving is all about just letting that wave come and not resisting it and letting it flood over you, feeling the panic, feeling the blood pressure, feeling the heat, feeling that stone in your gut, feeling the palpitations, just noticing and feeling and receiving it and hearing it, giving your mind and your body empathy, noticing, releasing, and remembering that you're not your thoughts. Versus resisting is, I can't tolerate the moment. I'm going to give up on the process. I need to distract myself from these unpleasant sensations. Oh my gosh, my heart is palpitating. I need to take Xanax, or maybe even Passiflora tincture, which is a natural herb that helps reduce anxiety. Resisting is not allowing those feelings to speak to you. It's putting them down, suppressing them, overfilling your schedule so that you don't have to be in your suffering. I have a client right now. She's an oncologist. So her specialty is, she's a physician. She works with cancer, and she has a lot of anxiety. And when she's at work, she feels her best because she's busy. Her schedule's busy. She is not thinking about it. She's distracting from it. And while that's productive and gives her the space to be with her clients, that position of resistance has resulted in those symptoms. It's kind of like a soda bottle, right? And then you shake it and the pressure builds, and you shake it and the pressure builds. And then she gets home from work and she just melts into panic attack after panic attack. And so then she's resisting the panic attack and she's trying to fix it. And she's trying to do all of the right things. And she's attaching meaning and narrative and fortune telling and all these different coping strategies to it. And so that's resisting, versus if she went home and she's like, all right, let's just be in this. I'm going to just hold the space. I'm going to pray. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to be in whatever expression of suffering my body needs me to experience so that I have the data to dive deeper and heal it. So that's resisting versus receiving.
So when people are, if they're in the middle of having a panic attack and they have that feeling of the impending doom that comes with it, and they're thinking they're going to die and I have to go to the ER, how did they get themselves to get out of that thought of being impending doom? Is it just a matter of for them to center, or what advice would you give to those people that are in the middle of it, or wake up in the middle of the night and just wake up in a panic and don't know exactly where they are and feel disoriented and just in a panic? In those moments, what would be your best advice for those people?
The first thing is you need to know that your anxiety won't hurt you. Your anxiety can't hurt you. That the body is going through the same chemical neurotransmitter process that it does when you're running from the tiger. It's just the context is different. So we wake up from sleep, we're in our beds, there's no tigers anywhere, and our body is producing those same chemical reactions. And the doom, like, oh my gosh, like there's an elephant on my chest and I can't breathe and I'm wheezing and I'm panicking, like those feelings feel really dangerous. And with panic and anxiety it's not dangerous. It's giving us data that it's out of balance in such a way that's presenting like that in its own unique way. And so the thing is to give it context, like, okay, my body is producing a whole bunch of epinephrine or adrenaline. Okay, my body is overproducing a bunch of cortisol. Okay, my blood pressure is going up. Okay, I feel really scared right now, but I know that I'm safe and I know that this will pass. And so the first thing is to have context. And the second thing is to have force field strategies. And when I teach my clients, and this is a big part of the ACT method, and this is actually in the T part of ACT. So we have acknowledge is A, which is where we started today. We have C, which is the casted characters, which I could talk about in a little bit. But right now we're talking about T, which is how do you transform that? So it's like we've acknowledged it, we've looked at it, we've started to deconstruct where it's come from. And now anxiety is striking. It's 3 a.m. I feel like my throat is closing. I'm panicking. What do I do? Right. And so when we think of force field strategies are things that surround us. They protect us. It's a force field, right? I think of it, you can do visually, you can imagine like a white light around you or a golden box, like whatever it is. And then force field strategies are those things that you employ that will help put you back into a place of calm and peace. And so one thing is that we can be in that space and we can receive that information, we can receive that anxiety. But in our earlier moments where we were talking about having empowerment over the symptoms, so that you're choosing when to go into that and acknowledge, and you're choosing when to tell it, nope, not now. I hear you. I'm putting you in a box. Is let's say we need to put it in a box. So you wake up, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm panicking. I need to put it in a box. And so if we're in the red zone, I call the red zone, like the red light, that's stop. This is panic. This is crisis. There are strategies, there are force field strategies that I've developed that work really well from that. And actually some of them I've gotten from DBT, Marsha Linehan, and we stand on the shoulders of giants, and DBT has such good information on that. And DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy. And it's a combination of traditional talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy with mindfulness. And the combination is a really great technique that clinicians use to help people when they're in emotional distress. And so what she talks about is tips for when we're in crisis. And I actually expanded on it. And so I abbreviate it TIPPSSSS, which is like tips, right?
Right.
So this is what you do in crisis. And I recommend that if you're listening to this, and I can give you guys like free blog content and like videos and pictures of what this would look like, but I would get a cue card and then write TIPPSSSS on your cue card, and then write out exactly what that stands for so that you could keep it on your nightstand or in your car or in your wallet or your purse, so that you, when you're in that crisis, it's hard to remember these things, right? So have your card. And so let's walk through what that stands for. So if you're in crisis, if you're having a panic attack, if your nervous system is running from a tiger, even though you're not in danger and it's like you need to sit at your desk and you need to work, right? And you're having all this anxiety. T is tip the temperature of your body. And so we know that if we can stimulate the vagus nerve, then we can change the way the nervous system is responding. And so there's around the eye in particular, if you can apply cold around the eye, that it will cause what's called a dive reflex. And so the dive reflex will slow your heart rate. It will bring down your blood pressure. It will cool off the body. And so what I've recommended is to create what's called a panic pack. And I have a panic pack that I have a video. I put it on Facebook so you guys could all watch that and learn how to make a panic pack. But in the panic pack are things that you can use that will help in a crisis. And I'll teach you about this. And so one is, how do we get cold ice? So one is you could get a bucket of ice water and hold your breath, stick your face in the bucket of ice water for 30 seconds. It'll evoke that dive response, and it can really quickly stop a panic attack in its tracks. But let's be real, not all of us have buckets of ice water to our availability. And if you're in a meeting or if you have makeup on your face or whatever it is, we can't stick our faces in buckets of ice water every time we're panicking, right? So it's like, what do we do instead? And there's actually online or even at like sports stores, you can get chemical packets where if you crack them, it will get really cold and it can turn into kind of like a freezer. So you could get those, put those in your panic pack. They can be, pretty small. They would fit like in a nice little fanny pack or little teeny tiny little purse. And then you can place those on your face. And so if you're feeling like that panic coming on, then opening those up, applying it around your eyes and your face is a really good strategy. So that's the T in tip. And so the I is intense exercise. And so when we're thinking about the nervous system in this autonomic arousal, in this state of activation, all these chemicals, is really the body is trying to get you to run from the tiger, right? So it's helping Susie have the blood pressure, have the heart, have the oxygenation, have the muscle contractility. And so the problem with anxiety is if we have all this energy building up like that soda bottle, and then we don't have an outlet for it. And so it's just stirring around and around in our bodies, right? And so intense exercise for some people can be really helpful, especially, by the way, if they benefit from certain botanicals and certain homeopathic remedies like sepia or Restox. It's another little tip for in there. But intense exercise can be really helpful. So to give you a story, I have a client and she lives in Portland. And she works a really high pressure, intense job, and it's a desk job and it requires a lot of analysis. And then oftentimes her boss will come in and he'll totally scrap the project she's working on and require that she does something totally different. And when her body is feeling and when her mind is feeling invalidated, unsupported, which are feelings she felt as a little girl, is that it triggers this fight, flight, freeze response and all this energy builds up. And she just feels like if she doesn't do something with this energy that she wants to self-harm. And so what we did is we started to educate her on what's actually biologically happening. And she started to use exercise. So she would take 2 minutes, she would get up from her desk and she would run a really strong lap around her office building, go back to her desk. And that was enough to get the energy out so she didn't have to self-injure. So intense exercise can be really helpful. I do want to mention though, with the exercise piece, that sometimes your anxiety may actually become amplified by intense anxiety. So if you try that and now you feel like 1,000 times worse, then maybe for you, you may actually need to do something more relaxing like a yoga nidra or a meditation or something that's more kind of dialing it down. And oftentimes as you're trying to identify that, it may be a little bit of trial and error. Another tool though is to identify, and this is kind of shifting a little bit, it's just so much fun to talk about, is Ayurvedic medicine. And so when we think about Ayurvedic medicine, when the body is under stress, it may go into one of three directions. And we call that in Ayurveda, it's Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And so when the body goes into a particular state, certain types of activity are more balancing for that state. And so if when you become anxious, you go into more of a Vata state where you have all this pent up energy, you're restless, your thoughts are racing, you're kind of in the clouds and you need to get back into your body, intense exercise may be really helpful, right? But it may be if you're more in a Pitta state that you're already hot and agitated. And for some people, adding more intense heat and vigorous exercise will make them worse. So getting to know you and your body and seeing a great naturopathic physician or an Ayurvedic clinician would be really good data so that you can really perfect this. But that's the I. And I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about this. So let's move to the next. So we have paced breathing. There's this really interesting research article that came out talking about the power of the left nostril. And I did an article on this. I was like, why would the left nostril make any difference? Like, it's amazing that you're breathing to begin with, but the data shows that if you breathe predominantly with your left nostril, that it activates what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the resting and the relaxation state of our body. So when you're running from the bear or running from the tiger or in a state of fight, flight, freeze, we can actually go straight into the breath. And that is one of the most powerful ways to stop a panic attack, because what it does is it changes the way the nervous system is responding. And so the strategy that I like to use it's called paced breathing, is you close your right nostril, and then you inhale through your left nostril for 4 counts. So you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you hold at the top for 4. And then you want to exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you hold at the bottom, and then you repeat. So it's kind of like imagining drawing a square. And this works in a couple of different ways. One is that when we get anxious, our breathing speeds up, right? And our breathing speeds up because we want to exhale CO2 and we want to breathe in more oxygen. We need the oxygen to keep up with the demand of the muscles in the heart that are working really hard so we can run away. But what the research out of the University of Iowa hospitals has identified is that oftentimes we will hyperventilate when we're anxious, and then we breathe out all of our CO2. It changes the pH in the brain, and that can make us more anxious. And so doing paced breathing is actually going directly in and changing the pH of the brain, which is going to help bring down anxiety, in addition to helping with your heart and your heart rate variability and activating your nervous system. So it's just such a jam-packed strategy. And then the other P is paired muscle relaxation. And it's similar to the exercise strategy where our muscles have all of this energy that's like making us tremble or want to run away. Another symptom of anxiety people may experience is spasming of the muscles, whether my shoulders and my neck are tight, or it could even be that you have jerking of the muscles. I can tell you when my anxiety was at its very worst that I was having spasms in my legs and my leg would jump involuntarily. And it was like my muscles were trying to run, even though there was no reason to run. And so doing paired muscle relaxation can be really helpful for getting that energy and mobilizing it so it's not stuck in the muscles. So what you could simply do is you could start at your feet and clench them for 10 seconds and then relax them. And then your calves, clench them and then relax them, and work your way up the body, tightening and then relaxing, and then going back to other areas that have increased amounts of tension. And don't forget your face and your tongue when doing this. A lot of people hold so much tension in their face. And so when you're doing this paired muscle relaxation, you might want to furrow your forehead, squeeze your eyes, clench your jaw, and then as you exhale, mindfully relax all of that. So the last part of what to do in a sheer panic attack, if we're needing to put that away and not be in that emotion and just let it do its thing, we need to put it away, is the 4S model. And so when we're panicking, the brain, it's like the logical part of the brain gets shut down. That's your prefrontal cortex. That's the part that helps put the brakes on to stop panic and anxiety. It's what helps you think rationally. And so that part of the brain is turned way down, and your amygdala, the emotional, the limbic system, that which gives us anxiety feelings, is turned way up. And then your brainstem is just running rampant. It's making your physical changes, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your sweating, your numbness and tingling, the shortness of breath, all of that, right? And so we want to employ strategies that speak to the more rudimentary parts of the brain, because logically, I don't know if you've ever been in this state where it's like, Susie's like, well, I'm laying in bed in my cave home and I'm safe, but my body doesn't think so. And so logically she may get that, but the brainstem and the amygdala they're like doing their own thing. They're like, safety, we're going to have a panic attack because we need to make us safe. So the 4S model is where we stimulate the brainstem with scent, sight, sip, and sensations or scene. And so anything that stimulates our senses. And so that could be like, what are you looking at? Is it light? Is it dark? Is it my boss's, the back of my boss's head, or whatever it is the scent is, have I been smelling a certain smell and I need a pattern interrupt? And so getting an essential oil, a lot of people are just loving essential oils. And I think a big part of it is you're changing the way the brainstem's getting data. My favorite pattern interrupt with essential oils is using something like, when I'm doing the anxiety work, I'll use something like lavender or ylang ylang. And then when I want to put something in a box and move on, I'll end with citrus and do like a lavender or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so
and what do you mean by putting something in the box?
Oh, putting something in the box is, so when we have let's say that you're sitting and you're about to do an interview. And for some reason, your body's like, hey, doc, we want to have a panic attack right now. And you're like, but I have to do an interview. I don't have the space for a panic attack, right? So you're going to acknowledge it. One is like, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I'm feeling. And then we can go, it's like a fork in the road. We can go in two directions. One direction is I'm going to just be in that space and let that ocean wave come over me. And I'm going to get that data and I'm going to dive deep, right? The other is that, wow, I need to do an interview. So I'm going to put this in a protective box. And so we could do where we kind of imagine all of those feelings that are coming up, imagine putting those in a box. And that's when we start using our strategies to stop the panic. So instead of being in it, we're stopping the panic. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if people have anxiety about something, let's say they have a lot of anxiety about work or taking a test at school, could they use that then and say, I'm not going to worry about this right now. So I'm going to put it in the box and then like put that box on the shelf, and I'm going to take it out later when I have time to deal with it, because right now I have to focus on what has to be done. You know, could be taking a test or go to work, right? Yes. So could people use it like that too, and just sort of put it aside?
Yes, that is exactly right. You just expressed that so beautifully and eloquently. It's why you're amazing and you're you. Is exactly. So like these big feelings are coming up. I have a test. I have to interview somebody. I'm going to an interview myself. And these big feelings are coming up. It's like, okay, Parts, I hear that you're sharing this with me and I honor you. And I thank you for sharing your suffering. And right now we're going to go in this protective box. I'm going to use my tips strategies. I'm going to calm my nervous system. I'm going to do the work. And then I'm going to do my interview. I'm going to go to my test, whatever it is. And then, as I promised you, I'm going to choose to come back and be like, okay, what was happening here? Let's go back in that. And then that's when guided imageries can be really amazingly powerful, and hypnosis and different things to be able to go back to that experience and be like, okay, what was happening there? Let's see if we can invite the body to share, invite the spirit to share so that we can work on that.
I love that. That's such a great tip and a tool to have in your pocket. You know, just stick it in the box for now, stick the box on a shelf, and I'll take you down later. That's great advice. So you were talking about the different S's and the different tips. Did you have anything else to add to the tips?
I think anything that really works for your body to do a pattern interrupt. So it's like, you're stuck on a record groove and the body's like, yep, I'm just going to be panicking now. I'm in this cycle of panic. It's like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you just need to interrupt that, is anything that gets the attention of the nervous system. And so senses is one of the S's, the 4S. And so like maybe going and getting in like a really cold shower or getting in a really hot shower or alternating it. It has to be as loud as the symptoms themselves. And so that's why sometimes people are like, don't tell me to meditate when I'm having a panic attack, because it's not going to help. And that could be because the autonomic nervous system is so on overdrive that right now the only thing that's going to work is speaking directly to the brainstem. So temperatures, smells, taste, sights, cold applications to the face, exercise, those muscle spasm relaxations. And so anything that works for you to get you back in your body is what would be in that.
Yeah, I love all your different advice. What about people who tends to get triggered? They have memories. We're talking a little bit about the limbic system and how the limbic system remembers the different smells or feelings about certain things. And if they have something that happens to them, and somebody was cooking fish when this terrible traumatic event happened, and now every time they smell somebody cooking fish, they get reminded of this terrible event. What could you tell these people? How do they deal with that? I know you were talking a little about the essential oils. So how could they get out of that limbic mode?
That is such a powerful question. And actually, just the other day, I was working on this with a client, and this client is actually in New Zealand. And the client's family was originally from China. And so his native language was Chinese. And he had grown up in New Zealand and grew up speaking English, but he didn't learn English until he was like 16. So I'm giving you kind of the context, right? And so he had intense amounts of anxiety at school. And he didn't know why he was having all this anxiety. And so he would go to school and then have panic attacks at school. And so then he ended up quitting school and was living at home. And so I'm helping him with his anxiety. So I love that you're asking this question, because it gives us an opportunity to dive just a teensy bit into the C, which is the cast of characters. We have the ACT method, right? The A, the C, and the T. And we talked about A, acknowledge. And then the T was the tools for transformation, which we jumped to second. But the C is really where the magic happens. And so the question that you're asking is how do we have something that's paired in the limbic system, like a smell, an association, whether it's my client there's something about the school or somebody who smelled fish cooking. The brain has what we call associations. It creates associative networks. And so what we did is a strategy that is on the forefront of trauma-informed counseling, trauma-informed therapy. And I call it parts work. You probably have also heard it called internal family systems or ego state work. And again, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so I kind of Dr. Kane-ified and created the strategy, which people can do at home, especially valuable right now when we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're doing more social distancing. And so having something that you can do to do the work on your own is really helpful. So let me walk you through an example, because I feel like real examples are helpful. So my client, we'll call him Fred, he's 23 years old, and he had a ton of anxiety at school. And now it's made it he's unable to go into buildings. Like any big building that reminds him of school, he can't go into. It's kind of like your fish example, right? The smell, the sights, the scene is very triggering for him. So what we did is an activity that I'm going to teach you right now. It's called Meeting Place. Meeting Place comes from internal family systems. And what you end up doing is you walk them through it using guided imagery, is you have them imagine going into a room with a beautiful table, and they invite all of their parts to come to that place. And so he imagined the table. He had his 4-year-old showed up, and his little self when he was 4. He had his 10-year-old was there. His 20-year-old was there. He had an anxious part and a confident part. And so I think altogether we had, about half a dozen parts that were in the room. And so we invited him. We said, okay, we've been really feeling kind of stressed about going into buildings and going into school. have any of you felt that way before? And then everybody raised their hand, even the 4-year-old. And so then we said, would anyone be willing to tell their story? And so the 4-year-old started telling his story. And what ended up happening is that the 4-year-old had gone to school, but mom had been very panicked and anxious about her son going to school. She was really scared about it. And he's a very sympathetic little boy. And so when he got to school, he felt so scared and so upset that he ended up going home to be with his mom. And this became a pattern. And so what he wanted, we asked him, well, what did you want to do instead? He said, I just wanted to be happy and play with my friends, but I felt like my mom really needed me, which is so amazing for a 4-year-old, right? And what's really interesting about this is that he's speaking in Chinese. And so we're kind of walking through it. And then an exercise that you can do is like, okay, what if we were to imagine that you're holding onto a backpack, and that in that backpack are the worries about your mom, those yucky, scary memories of going into the school building. Let's put all of those things that you were experiencing in this backpack. And so he did that, and he gathered all these feelings and worries and thoughts, and we put them in the backpack. And I said, what would it feel like if we just set that down? And if you got to know that it's 2020 and Fred is grown up and he took care of that for you, and we brought him into the present, because our time capsules, our parts don't know that it's 2020. They don't know what it is. They're stuck back in time. Mm-hmm. And so he ended up, to make a long story short, he put that backpack down, and then he felt happy and he felt free. The little ego states often very easily will release some of those scary things. Our older parts sometimes are more resistant, but the littles are very open often. So he set down his backpack and we ended the session. And it took my client a full 30 seconds to remember how to speak English. And it was just such a deeply powerful experience. And so that's an example of how we go in and we deal with some of the origins of those associations. Is you can do EMDR therapy, which is where you think of the memory and work your way back, or you can do this meeting place exercise where you go to the very first time where you felt that way. The very first time in your example, doctor, is when they smelled the fish cooking. And it's like, okay, little part, tell me what you needed. Tell me what your fears were. Tell me what happened. And then releasing that and then giving them that comfort to meet their needs. And then oftentimes people have really amazing transformations. So that's part of the psychological characters, or the cast of characters, and the C of the ACT method.
Wow, love it. You have so much good advice for all the listeners.
Thank you.
I know that you mentioned at the beginning, you have some complementary resources online, and something about the 1-week anxiety freedom challenge. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
So my passion is when I was in my worst anxiety, I felt like everybody, it's like we go back to the beginning of our conversation, my love, like everybody has their own philosophy. They're like, okay, Dr. Kane, you just need more acupuncture. Dr. Kane, you just need more adrenal support, whatever it was. And so I felt like I was doing all of the things, but like really, sister, what fundamentally my soul needed was to be acknowledged, to be heard, and to be given strategies for transformation. And so I created my entire world around giving as much of this information as possible as I can out free. And one of my favorite strategies, one of my favorite tools is the 1-week challenge, where I had a beautiful book made. I made 14 videos. It's in 1 week. And what will happen is you can get it for free. You'll get the book, it'll download to you, and then you get to watch the videos. And it basically walks you through 14 of my favorite skills, which actually will help you right now start sending anxiety backstage. And so what this would be is this would be at the fork in the road of, I'm either going to deal with that emotion right away, right now, or it will give you the tools to be able to put that in the box like we were talking about, so that you can do what you need to do and not be hijacked by your panic when you're in the middle of something important to you. And so that resource is available. You can find it on my Facebook page. You could also find it on my website, drnicolekane.com. And then I'll make sure to give Doc here a link so that you could just click it directly. And it's called the free 1-week anxiety freedom challenge. And it's just my gift, especially for your listeners, because I honor what you guys are doing and I'm really happy to share it.
That's wonderful. And how do people follow you on Facebook? Are you on Facebook and Instagram?
I am on all of the things. And so it's
all platforms. And
all
how
of
do
the
they find
platforms.
you?
It's
How do
at
they find
Dr.
you?
Yeah, you just go to facebook.com and you just search for Dr. Nicole Cain, which is DrNicoleCain. And that's my Instagram handle. And I even have a couple silly TikTok videos up, but I am no means a TikTok girl. But, there's just like fun, free stuff everywhere.
That's great. So everybody go check out the 1 week anxiety freedom challenge on her website, Dr. Nicole Cain. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show and share your knowledge with all the listeners.
I just want to say I'm so deeply honored. Thank you for the opportunity to get to be a part of the work that you're doing. You're incredible and I admire you. And I really want to especially express how I admire your authenticity with your story, because people are desperately craving authenticity. And I think that being real and being vulnerable gives people a lot of hope. And so I was really excited to be able to connect with you in this way. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much for those words. It means a lot to me. I just have a passion to try and help people as much as I can, both scientifically and spiritually. And as you know, everything is connected. And if we can just open people's minds to finding new ways for them to heal so that they can live their life to their fullest potential. So again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Dr. Lottie, Science with Soul. Make sure you are subscribed so you will be notified of new episodes as they become available. To book a session with me or to sign up for a workshop or to see me as a physician, please visit drlottie.com or divinespiritualessence.com. My book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, is available online at Amazon as well as other online platforms worldwide.